Okay, hello everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some of the economic consequences of North Sea oil. First of all, we want to know where the North Sea is. The North Sea is in the northeast coast of Scotland. It's in the southwest, to the southwest of Norway. It's this area here. And obviously each red dot here represents an oil field. The key thing about the North Sea is that beneath the surface, there's fish. But then, even more importantly than that, beneath the seabed, there's oil and gas. This is the maritime border, so the sea border that separates the UK's waters, and these are the UK waters here, from Norway's waters. So, key thing to remember is that there's a maritime border as well as a physical land border. This graph here, this map here, shows the UK continental shelf, which shows the UK's maritime border. So you might think the UK is just being Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales, but it's also made up of the sea as well. So this here is also part of UK territory. So it's this place here, this area down here. And the dark area that's shaded is the area that belongs to, or the area that's attributed to be Scotland's. And again, so whilst this area is part of Scotland's maritime border, maybe this area here is slightly more important, given that beneath the sea there's oil. Look at a little bit of history. In the 40s and 50s, geologists discovered onshore UK gas and became pretty certain the UK had significant deposits. Exploration continued in the 60s and 70s. In December 1969, Phillips Petroleum, soon to merge with another company, become British Petroleum, discovered a big oil field. In 1970, BP discovered the Forties field, which is one of the big fields of oil beneath the seabed. That was 135 miles off Aberdeen. These discoveries continued during the 70s, and this whole process represented one of the most important economic developments in the second half of the 20th century in the UK. So these massive fields were discovered, and the goal was to get the oil out of the ground, take it all the way to a refinery, and the refinery in Scotland was the biggest one, was in Grangemouth, where the oil would be refined into petrol and other usable fuels. This was obviously a massive human effort to get the oil out of the bottom of the ocean bed. First of all, the oil fields themselves were over 100 miles off of the land. The sea was about half a mile deep, and the oil was 1.7 miles below the seabed. And these seas were not pretty, calm, relaxed waters. These were some of the most extreme seas on Earth. Don't think I'd like to go for a swim in either of those conditions. So massive human effort, massive investment required to get the oil out of the ground. Estimated that the North Sea oil fields required investment of £13 billion in 1976 to get the systems up and running. Shell estimated the cost of developing a field over 10 years to be £2.4 billion, which was as much as a space shot to the moon. This was some of the biggest investment in the UK since the Industrial Revolution 200 years earlier. Working in the platforms and the rigs was also dangerous work. In July 1988, the Piper Alpha platform exploded and killed 167 men, maybe the most tragic tale out of the history of the North Sea. Production, though, did rise from the 70s. Production rose all the way up to the mid-80s, dipped a little bit. Then production continued to be quite high in the early 90s, all the way up to 2000, when the UK was producing $1 trillion a barrel on oil, $1 trillion a barrel of oil per year. And most of that was from the UK's. Most of that was from Scotland's geographical share of where the oil was. So most of this was coming out of Scotland, almost all of it. But since 98, production has declined quite sharply. From a peak, we can see here in the early 90s of, well, that's 130 million tons of oil, up here about almost 140 million tons of oil, all the way down to estimated to being, well, about, some estimates put it about 40 billion barrels, 40 million tons of oil. So significant decline is the key story from where we were at the amount that was being produced. One thing about the oil that was being produced, it was being produced by private companies who were able to make profits from it themselves. But it was felt, given that this was a national asset, that rather than just allowing private companies to take the profits from it, that quite a lot of this should go back to society, that the government should be able to take a big share of that, then spend it in social projects that benefit everybody. So the system the UK had was to let private companies extract the oil and sell it. But as they did sell it, as they did make profits, there would be quite a heavy tax regime, which would allow the UK government to generate money for the British people. So there were different sets of tax regime: revenue tax, ring-fence corporation tax, and supplementary charges, all of which meant the UK government was able to generate money from the profits private companies made in the North Sea. And this did generate quite a lot of money for the UK government. We see from this early 70s, this graph goes from the early 1970s up until 2012, 2013. And this shows the amount of tax revenue from the UK continental shelf, from both oil and gas, that was generated for the UK government to spend. And this goes from 5 billion to 10 billion, 15, 20, 25, up to 30 billion. We can see as the fields were coming along, they were generating just a little bit. Then by 79, 80, 81, 82, they were generating over $10 billion by the early 80s. By the time we get to the mid 80s, 83, 84, generating well over 25, maybe 27.5 billion pounds for the UK government. That's again quite a lot. Declined quite a bit though since then. But overall though, from when it was discovered up to 2013, it's estimated that the UK was able to generate 300 billion pounds from North Sea oil. If any of you know your political history, then between 1979 and 1990, the Prime Minister in the UK was Margaret Thatcher. So although people don't think of Thatcherism with North Sea oil, the fact is Scotland bankrolled the Thatcher years with the money generated from the North Sea. And the key thing to know about the cash we generated is the money went in, it went straight out. So as soon as the UK government got the money, it would spend it on either health or education or defence or the police. But the point is we didn't save any of it. It gets spent entirely as soon as it came in. Lots of people said, well, instead of sharing this money with the rest of the UK, given that almost all of this is being generated in Scottish waters, couldn't Scotland become independent and keep all of this for ourselves? The SNP ran a campaign during the time, criticising or attacking Mrs. Thatcher for having taken all of Scotland's oil. No wonder she's laughing. The poster read, "She's got Scotland's oil." The other campaign was "Free by 93. We can take some of this revenue generated here and put it aside for Scotland." Obviously, we know that that didn't happen. So since the production has declined, as we can see here, so since production has fallen, the number of jobs available has also declined. So as the price of oil has declined and as production has declined, then there's going to be less jobs available in the North Sea, or less jobs available that are associated with oil production in the North Sea. In 2015, there were 220,000 people employed in Scotland related to oil and gas extraction. By 2019, there was maybe only 110,000. This particularly affected areas in the northeast, particularly Aberdeen, which did rely a little bit on the excitement of oil and with the history of oil and having conferences and having companies setting up there. As it became less profitable, then less companies set up and more companies have left, which has affected the employment prospects of people in Aberdeen. And part of the reason for this was the big decline in the price of oil. So we see between 2010 and 2015, or at least between 2010 and between 2014, oil was up at over $100 a barrel consistently. the time we get to 2014, the price of oil, this is the price of oil in dollars per barrel, from $20 up to $140. And this goes from 2010 up to 2019. And we see the price of oil goes way down to about $50 a barrel, then eventually way down to less than $40 a barrel. Recovers then, rises up to about $80 a barrel by just as we get to 2019. The consequence of this lower oil price then is that companies will make less profits. If the oil price is lower, then profits for oil companies will be lower. And as profits for oil companies are lower, there'll be less money for the UK government to get from the taxing of the profits in these companies. So this graph here shows how much tax revenue was generated by the North Sea from 2015-16 up until 2019-20. So these are different taxes. This is the total. If we look at the most recent figures, £650 million was generated in 2019-20 by taxes on North Sea oil production. This compares with over £1 billion the last 2 years, down in 2015-16 when oil prices really went down. The tax revenue generated was negative 85 million. Now, the reason this happened is because the UK government started to subsidise some oil producers in the UK. So rather than collecting tax from them, it paid them money so they could stay in business, so that when oil prices went back up, they would still be able to be operating and they'd still be able to keep employment going in the northeast and keep the North Sea and keep the UK as an oil producer. So 650 million was generated in 2019-20. That seems like a lot of money, but if you put it into context, in 2019-20, spending in Scotland, so the government spending in Scotland was £81 billion. We spent maybe 12.5 billion-ish on the health service in 2019-20. So 650 million all of a sudden seemed kind of small beer. It would be less than 1% of government spending. So it's a lot in some ways, but it's not going to be able to fund very much as a percentage of given how much things cost. In 2019-20, the average price of a barrel of oil was $61. So since then, if you look at the price, in the financial year 2020-21, which I've got in this graph here, so we start of the financial years, the 1st of April, up until the present. We see at present it's $55 a barrel, but it did go all the way down to less than $9 per barrel back in April. So oil prices went way down, and it went way down because less people wanted to buy fuel, not least because of airlines. Airline travel collapsed due to the coronavirus. Airline travel fell by 95%, and as airline travel fell, airlines needed less jet fuel, and as they needed less jet fuel, there was less point in getting oil out of the ground to try and refine it into jet fuel because nobody's there to buy it. So the price went way down as less people were buying it. As the lockdown ends, we see prices gone back up since. So it's now at $55. But the point is, if the average price was $61 in 2019-20, and that helped to generate £650 million, the average price this financial year will be a lot less, which also probably means that the amount that we're going to generate in taxation from North Sea oil will also be substantially less. Not only is the price of oil lower than it has been in other years, in previous decades, the UK is also the most expensive place in the world to get oil out of the ground from. So this graph shows the cost in dollars per barrel to get oil out of the ground. It goes from $5.10 all the way up to 45, and each A bar in the graph represents a country. So this here shows Kuwait, and we see in Kuwait it costs less than $5 per barrel to extract oil. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Oman, all less than $5, and the reason is they don't have these deep water drill projects as we do in Scotland. Oil is pretty close to the surface of the land, and it's relatively cheap to get oil out of the ground. Whereas we look at all these other countries, by the time you get up to Great Britain, it costs almost $40 per barrel to get oil out of the sea. Given that there's these very extreme conditions without the North Sea, which also means the UK is the most expensive place in the world to extract oil from. And that means unless the oil price is high, then it's not profitable to get oil out of the ground. If it's costing $40 per barrel to get oil out of the ground, and if the oil price falls below that, then lots of production sites, lots of sites will just become unprofitable, and it won't be worth anybody's time to get oil out of there. So if the oil price stays low, UK can't do much to change that. And as prices fall, then investment in North Sea oil projects will dry up. It won't be profitable at low prices. The price of oil has to be high for it to be worthwhile for companies to set up in the North Sea. And as companies' investment pulls out, then jobs pull out as well, and that can affect the economy of the northeast of Scotland. People ask, could it have all been so different? The Norwegians thought so. They had a different strategy. Rather than getting the money and spending it straight away, the Norwegians had a different model where they saved very, very large percentages of the oil they generated. So they didn't spend it all as soon as it came in. They set up a fund. So a fund's like a place where they saved all the money into. So they saved the money into this fund. And as the money came in, rather than keeping the money as cash, they would then invest the money in things like American companies or British companies or real estate in New York or real estate in China. They would invest the money that came in different assets. And the wealth that they've generated now, the sovereign wealth fund they've generated, that they set up, is now worth over $1 trillion, which is the largest fund in the world. They spend less than 4% of that each year, which means the fund's able to grow each year, even though they're spending some of it. But because the assets they've invested in are growing, the fund can grow even as they're taking some money out of it. People ask, couldn't Scotland have done the same? Shoulda, woulda, coulda, didn't damn. This is the value of the oil fund now from the Norway's oil fund website. Shows the value is worth over 11 trillion Norwegian krona. So no wonder she's smiling when she's got in a country that's got this large kitty for her. We work to safeguard and build financial wealth for future generations. If you look at things about the fund, each year they spend only a small part of the fund, but this still amounts to almost 20% of the government budget. So that'd be quite nice if Scotland had 20% of our budget, 20% of our NHS spending, 20% of police spending, everything taken care of without actually having to raise any taxes. It was just taken care of by a fund. When you look at about the fund, Norway's oil fund was created after they discovered oil in the North Sea. The fund was set up to shield the economy from the ups and downs in oil revenue. It also serves as a financial reserve and a long-term saving plan so that both current and future generations get to benefit from our oil wealth. Obviously, given that prices of oil are likely to be lower in the future and that production in the UK is scheduled to decline, then it seems unlikely that any future generation is going to substantially benefit from the amount of oil remaining in the North Sea. So, in conclusion then, or a summary of what we've looked at, North Sea has played and still plays an important part in the UK and in the Scottish economy. Production's been declining in recent years though. It has added over £300 billion to UK Treasury since the 70s, but all of that was spent and none of it was saved. With prices lower this year, tax revenues are likely to be lower too. Lower oil prices harm oil producers who can get less revenue from the sale of oil. But there are some benefits, which is it does help consumers. It means prices of petrol at the pump will be cheaper and gas and electricity bills are potentially going to be cheaper. One thing it also means is that the case for Scottish independence is a little bit harder than it could have been. It could have been easier to make the case for Scottish independence if there were very high oil prices and if we could then set up a big fund of our own and save into it for the future. But given that big pot of money isn't there, then the case is a little bit harder to make than it otherwise might have been.